Santayana, Dominions and Powers, Part 2, Economic Arts. Chapter 1, The Birth of Art. All animals seize and crush their food in their mouths or gullets, and many seize it first with their paws and tear it with claws or talons. Now every human infant has a like native impulse and power to seize any small object at hand, and if, when older and stronger, he seizes a heavy stick, he will immensely increase the range and power of his arm to strike a blow. Similarly, if he seizes a pointed stone, he may easily break things that defy his teeth. Such sticks and stones are the primitive instruments of human art, and simply extend beyond the living body the functions of teeth and claws. With this, the human psyche has begun to bring parts of the surrounding world under its dominion. It involves no miracle, no immaterial power. Every psyche, in proportion to the complexity and precision of the powers involved in its seminal heritage, spreads around it a sort of magnetic field. Its presence and quality are faintly traceable throughout its environment, like the radiation of smell or of invisible gravity. But this self-transcendent effect of any living creature on its neighbors remains for the most part imperceptible or marked only by a vague tension or, as it were, a shadow passing over things without disturbing them materially. There is needed, for instance, an intense and deeply intentional concentration of a glance to cause a passer-by to feel it and turn his head. Yet not only the force, but the motive and spirit of that glance may be sometimes felt strongly, and be a signal for distinct emotions of terror, repulsion, amusement, or attraction. These are psychic reactions to another psyche, which is exerting only an ethereal force, yet one that some children and animals are quick to distinguish. It is when the psyche uses the human hand that its influence can begin to transform inanimate matter. The first man who wields a stick, the first child who throws a stone, has initiated that use of material instruments, which has created for us the immense and overpowering modern mechanism of industry, trade, and war. And this has happened without any miraculous intervention of disembodied foresight or reason. Expert skill in doing what is feasible merely extends the eagerness of the suckling to swallow what is swallowable. It is the need of free exercise for all organs that initiates useful arts. Their utility, when discovered, flatters the pride of the discoverer, as a stroke of good luck flatters the gamester. For it not only supplies a new resource and increases the powers and demands of the lucky fellow, but convinces him that he has a guiding star, or a native genius, or a vocation to serve the whole human race. Prometheus, in discovering fire, which the poets call bringing it down from heaven, acquired an undeserved fame for philanthropy. Fire breaks out spontaneously, sometimes in the woods, and must have been struck 1,000 times by primitive man ferreting in the jungle. Where intelligence and thrift appear is in observing and applying the use of fire in keeping away wild beasts, roasting, or, when pots existed, boiling victuals, and in melting metals so as to render them malleable. These arts have been a less pious moral effect than has the practice of agriculture or even of taming and breeding animals. In work upon dead matter, nature seems to do less, and man feels that he does everything. Bits of stone, wood, or metal in reality condition the character of the service they can come to render to human life as much as do earth and seeds, rain and sunshine, but they do not, like plants, grow of themselves and reach highly articulate forms such as human fancy or labor can never rival. What we call dead matter seems relatively passive and changeless, although this turns out to be a profound error caused by the blanketing effect of summary human sensations turned upon the object, and, for the fool, seeming to define it. But of all the secret agitation and power of wood and clay, and even of stone, nothing reveals itself at first except its deadness. You may pick it up, cut it up, throw it about, or heap it together, and it will remain, for the most part, as you left it. This constancy of inanimate things on the scale of domestic instruments renders them faithful missiles to use against animals and enemies, or means of bending the wider elements, land, water, and the jungle itself, to human convenience. The maker or skillful user of tools feels a different attachment to them from that which the farmer feels to his land or his cattle. His possessions lend the landlord his dignity. They probably have been inherited, since they form a continuous source of livelihood and a relatively safe nest where an entire life is profitably spent and a family is founded that may grow into a clan. The land sustains its lord, morally no less than materially, so much so that in feudal times the nobility bore the names of their estates, and even kings those of their dominions, and it was only a recognition of their position when they learned to love their lands and their families, their castles and tenants, and to feel pride in their worth and welfare. But the pride of the artisan in his art and its uses is pride in himself. His tools are indeed precious, but his use of them is not a duty, but a feat, and it is in his skill and ability to make things as he wishes them to be that he rejoices. His distinction, when he is a great master, is not to be called after his works, but that his works should be called by his personal name. Probably the first use made of sticks and stones as implements was in attack or defense, or at least in knocking down fruits or any other object out of reach of the hand. This militant or destructive posture appears necessarily in the chase, where the original purpose is to get food, a posture that belongs essentially to war. These two most pressing occasions for using weapons, hunting and fighting, make the manufacture of weapons the most competitive and crucial of arts in human society, and never more so than it is now. The scale and the destructive power of armaments have lately increased so surprisingly that we can see, as if magnified for our instruction, what is the ultimate or fatal function of mechanical arts, namely, to make primal will in man irresponsible and absolute. There is a fundamentally cruel, egotistical joy in plucking, breaking, killing anything. This passion is normally checked and balanced by others, but the greater and swifter the power that mechanical instruments put in man's hands, the greater will be the occasional temptation that will assail him to put this power to the test. And this is socially and morally an omnipotent power, less to produce than to destroy, since physical force can sweep the ground and exterminate the bearers of every moral tradition. Apart from the present plight of a mechanized world, I suspect that there is a profound duplicity in the destiny which the power of making tools opens up to mankind. Evidently, it expands the range and multiplies the instruments of the psyche, so that man in his frail body becomes the master and reconstructor of everything on the earth's surface. But morally, this triumph is a snare. Individually, if bred under an agricultural regimen, the boy with mechanical aptitudes will emancipate himself, become a peddler, a mountebank, a lion tamer, a sailor, an explorer, a pilferer, a bandit. The world he moves in will become more and more a human and artificial world. The more expert he grows in his tricks, the less respect he will have for the matter he works on, and the more confidence in his own abilities. Collectively, the class of artisans and mechanics will be festively proud of themselves, jealous of one another personally, like all artists, but animated with much esprit de corps, and factious only against men of other professions, and contemptuous above all of peasants and clerics. Having power over society, when society has begun to think their wares indispensable, they will push their corporate claims to the utmost, be turbulent in politics, and ready to impose monopolies and even governments. All this flows from the economic direction in which the tool maker or commodity maker directs his interest. He triumphs by enlarging the sphere of human material possessions, material power, and material demands. His ideal, if he were made articulate, would seem to be to supply everybody with the greatest possible quantity and variety of things, and he, by helping to make these things, would naturally deserve to enjoy any amount of them of the best quality. There is perhaps a dialectical difficulty in this expectation, for if the artisan is fully employed in making one sort of material commodity, it seems that he could hardly have taste or time to enjoy or consume a daily growing number of other luxuries, even if they were socially supplied gratis. His body and his mind would neither need nor enjoy the greater part of them. However, he might have all he wanted so long as he worked as hard as he could. But what is work? When the first man or boy made his first tool, he did so in play, out of curiosity at seeing the way in which long grass or pliable stems could be woven together to make a basket that would hold pebbles or nuts or berries, and enable him to carry them about. Or he was intellectually fascinated by the transformations that he could cause an object to undergo, and the way in which he could make it imitate something else, so as to astonish or deceive people and make them laugh. These amusements were voluntary, they were entertaining, yet they were the beginnings of mechanical industry. They were also, however, the beginnings of liberal arts. This work might well be a free, happy, and enlightening occupation, his own reward, and the product of it might be good, not for being useful, but for being beautiful. There is a sense, indeed, in which the effort to dominate matter materially is, in the Stoics' phrase, contrary to nature. Not that it cannot be done, and done brilliantly, up to a certain point, but that the intrinsic constitution of man and of the world he lives in limits the profitable effects that they can have on one another. Agriculture rewards the laboring man by yielding better and more abundant food for him near at hand, and at the same time developing certain splendid forms of vegetation impossible in the jungle. But the manufacture of instruments renders all sorts of new works possible which may be tempting to the producer. if he can sell the product at a good price, but may be bad for him as an occupation and bad for the misguided buyers as a luxury. Acquisitive vice in the conceited inventor, prodigal vice in the others. Cooperative vices may build a Tower of Babel until the foundations give way, and vain indulgence and vain labor collapse together. Insofar, on the contrary, as making and using instruments can remain liberal arts, work is not carried on under external pressure, but with a vital liberty, which studies and remolds matter in sympathy with its own life or in ideal variations upon it, expressing human capacity for conception and enjoyment. This element is primitive and able to pervade economic arts, as well as the whole militant order of society. When work or war responds to a native inclination and is carried on with a masterful understanding of the means employed and of their object, arts may all be liberal without ceasing to be useful, or when they become useful accidentally, and in a well-ordered community, few or none of the offices of daily life will lack a spiritual sanction. It is rather fine arts that grow pale and empty, as well as ugly, when they are altogether separated from economic and moral uses, and express only caprice, luxury, and affectation. The tyranny of forced labor, in its turn, defeats the moral function of economic art, which is to enlarge vital liberty. Chapter 2. Claims and conflicts of the arts. Arts are animated by an interest which becomes the criterion of their excellence. This interest may be intrinsic to the action, as in singing, or it may be rooted in some other function of the organism, as in tilling the earth. For in this art little remains of the childish interest in delving for its own sake. All is hard labor for the hands, done to satisfy a lively impulse of the mouth and a radical need of the belly. Casual effects that an idle man's action may have, such as making a slightly meandering path through a field by often walking across it, are signs of his passage. But since his will in that action was only to cross the field and not to make a path, the path was not a product of economic art, although it may have economic and even legal effects by establishing a right-of-way. Society is traversed by paths of this kind, molds set by casual action for public action, such that, although never intended, they now complicate social existence with a network of needless difficulties and foolish compulsions. An implication of this is that society dominates more than it is dominated. It was not originally a work of art, and education and government have a hard task in trying to make an art of it. Not all arts are as clear as agriculture in their problem and criterion, but in principle they all rely on some hunger in the psyche to be relieved by some specific eventual attainment, perhaps only vaguely conceived and easily missed by the groping efforts of inexperienced souls, perhaps under hopeless conditions. Even the primitive husbandman is not sure of success. Some rival may claim his land, the incorrigible jungle may invade it. Inundations, drought, or a plague of insects may destroy his crop, or an enemy horde may purloin it. Misfortune, if he has no other means of subsistence, will seem to him the more unjust, the more intelligent and constant have been his exertions. Land, when a man has cultivated it, seems to him his by right, as do all its products, so too do his tools. Agriculture, by virtue of its calculable periodic fruits, excites the feeling of proprietorship with a particular force. It is not only his present property that a wicked enemy threatens to rob the farmer of, but of his father's heritage, of his whole future, and of that of his children. He will take up arms, and if he has no nearer protector, will call on heaven for vengeance with a mounting fervor of devotion. This intense proprietary passion repeats in a human form the absolute fury with which the bulldog clings to whatever he holds in his teeth. The same feeling, variously qualified, animates all economic art. It overflows illegitimately, but intelligibly, into the liberal arts also, even into what we call fine art. This happens because the artist and his work are dynamic units in the realm of matter, which possess or attract a strong interest in their preservation, or in continued exercise of the rare faculties thus acquired. Such moral units become nuclei for a whole web of interests that seem all the more urgent that they are precarious. They may lapse in oneself, and when they flare up most vividly, they may be denied and opposed by other people. Here we have a cue, if I am not mistaken, to the vital human side, hidden in the psyche of all economic arts. The secret economy of an animal organism passes in the political world for inspiration by ideal ambitions, or a dramatic evolution of history according to providential or dialectical laws. History is indeed tragic enough, but why have men such misguided ambitions and inexplicable enthusiasms, that they should ever invent such dialectical laws or devious divine designs is itself evidence of psychic promptings, crossing observation and breeding impossible expectations and vain anxieties. Economic arts in particular, which are most closely controlled by the real potentialities of matter, nevertheless deviate in all directions from rational industry, run into the opposite blind alleys of avarice and luxury, and equip militant egotism with instruments for its mad experiments. All this occurs because the motive force in economic labor always remains some offshoot of primitive greed and cupidity. The good to be attained is not seen or imagined, but is at bottom only an indiscriminate impulse to grasp, to keep, and to swallow. This lends demagogues their power, gamblers and speculators their false hopes, and misers a chuckling contentment in their misery. Anthropologists and economists may trace all the forms that domestic and rural life assumed, and historians may describe the quick development of civilization in various times and places, with the long decadence or the sudden catastrophes due to barbarian conquest or perverse revolutions that have caused civilization to decline, often to the point of local extinction. I take a summary knowledge of those things for granted, and limit myself to the side of the subject which touches political morals, or the fortunes of vital liberty in the face of all kinds of alien oppression. The reader must not expect me to trace the fortunes of liberty historically or eschatologically, as if all were progress towards perfection. Everything in the world, considered temporally, is a progress towards death. True progress is an approach, in favorable seasons, to perfection in some kind of life. It is, in other words, the emergence of virtue of any kind, in any place, and for any period, out of the play of dominations and powers. Those whose philosophy formulates alleged laws of history or dialectic of events would call my results abstract, and they certainly neglect the infinite miscellany of facts, and regard only interesting classes or types of facts and their interesting relations. Such a consideration of things is what I would call moral, and I am confident that the reader will find my account of history less abstract than that of the historical philosophers, for they attribute events to abstract laws or ideal implications of essences, so that their history is vitiated by a sectarian interpretation of events and by wishful thinking, and their moral judgment is vitiated by inhumanity and by the worship of success and of endless mutation. All arts are powers in danger of becoming dominations, because, necessarily having organs in the psyche, and many of them also instruments in the public world, they are rivals, and each tends to monopolize the energies of life at the expense of other developments, or even at the price of life itself. The economic arts, however, just because their investments and their vital subject matter are alike physical, are open and honest rivals, and it is easier in regard to them for the critic to conceive the combinations or the alternative sacrifices that they may make, so that each might be developed most completely where circumstances favor it, without impeding the development of the others at other times and places. In other words, a rational peace among economic arts is conceivable and might perhaps be established if mankind could be governed by a single enlightened and impartial authority. Great economic developments are not necessary to life. Population does not outrun the local means of support. If the simpler economy of one nation were not invaded by the richer economy of another nation, more favorably endowed for the arts prevalent at that moment, all might practice their own industries in peace, and make such exchanges as did not derange them. I am not professing to offer recommendations on the subject or on any other. Those concerned must speak for themselves if they can distinguish their real needs and powers, and are not carried away by needless or hopeless ambitions. The desire, for instance, of those who are naturally different to become socially alike makes for moral suicide, as if cows wish to behave like bulls, or bulls like cows. The generative order of nature is the seedbed of every kind of beauty and virtue, and both can be realized only by fidelity in the growth of the psyche to its own potentialities. Not all these can be realized, nor any of them always, but only as circumstances permit. Virtues that any man or society will actually manifest are therefore always variable, but only those will be genuine that can take root in the psyche, so as to become definite and even hereditary. Uncongenial virtues, or opinions, that a man may assume for worldly reasons, are hypocritical and really, in him, vices. It may, however, be a genuine virtue in someone else, but not when injected into a creature whose natural life it will derange, contravene, and perhaps destroy. Such fatal experiments are more easily recognized and avoided in material than in moral collisions. For this reason, economic arts, though occasionally lost or crippled in some regions, have on the whole maintained or slowly improved their ancient methods until recent times, when these methods have been suddenly transformed by the invention of machinery propelled by steam or electricity. For thousands of years, plowing, reaping, milking, cooking have preserved their fundamental character throughout the world, and spinning, weaving, and building had varied chiefly on the decorative or monumental side, while mechanically constant in their principles. But meantime, in the liberal arts, all has been mutation without progress, because no quick material control excluded all physically possible vagaries in language, religion, philosophy, manners, and dress. Edible mushrooms are distinguishable at sight from bad ones, but the poison of vice in conduct and in government, though visibly damaging and sometimes fatal, seduces generation after generation in their vital innocence, and nation after nation in their helpless public fatuity.